In my 15 years as a urologist and andrologist, I have learned that every story that comes into my office carries far more than just physical symptoms. It brings with it fears, expectations, and above all, love. That is how I met Esther Grace and Charles, a couple who taught me that medicine goes far beyond reports and prescriptions. It was an autumn afternoon when Esther, a 58-year-old woman with expressive eyes and a reserved smile, arrived at my office. Initially, she came alone, saying she needed guidance on delicate matters. I could see in her demeanor a mixture of determination and apprehension that I had witnessed so many times before. "Doctor," she began, adjusting herself in the chair, "I don't exactly know how to talk about this." Her hands were clasped in her lap, betraying her nervousness. "It's about my husband, Charles. We've been together for 35 years, but lately, something has changed." As a physician specializing in men's health, I had already witnessed countless similar situations. Aging brings with it changes that, although natural, can shake even the strongest relationships. But every story is unique, and the story of Esther and Charles had particularities that soon caught my attention. "It started subtly," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she found the words. "Charles had always been a very present, affectionate man. But in the last few months, he began to distance himself. First, there were excuses for not going out together, then a withdrawal of physical closeness." As Esther spoke, I observed not only her words but also the body language accompanying her narrative. Years of experience had taught me that often, what remains unsaid reveals just as much as what is spoken, and there was so much love in every word of hers, even as she described the difficulties. "Charles is 62 years old," she explained, "and he had always been very proud of his vitality. He worked his whole life as a civil engineer, always active, always in command. But now," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "now he seems to have lost that confidence that once defined him." As a professional in the field, I know that the physical changes of aging can have a profound impact on male self-esteem. Our society still carries many stereotypes about masculinity and performance, making this period even more challenging for many men. "I've tried talking to him several times," Esther continued, "but Charles always dodges the subject. He says everything is fine, that it's just work fatigue. But I know him, doctor. I know there's something more going on." At that moment, I realized I was facing a case that would require more than medical knowledge. It would demand sensitivity to handle deep emotional issues that affect not just an individual, but an entire relationship. "Esther," I said, leaning slightly in her direction, "you have taken a very important step today. Many couples face similar situations in silence, allowing distance to grow. The fact that you are here, seeking to understand and help, is already a very positive sign." I saw her shoulders relax a little with my words. It was crucial for her to understand that she was not alone on this journey. "What is happening with Charles is more common than you imagine," I continued. "The changes that come with aging can be challenging, especially for men, who have often not been taught to deal with their vulnerabilities." As we talked, I shared with Esther some information about the natural physiological changes that occur in male aging, using clear, accessible, and welcoming language. It was important for her to grasp the medical aspect of the situation without losing sight of the emotional component that permeated everything. "The first step," I explained, "is to bring Charles in for a consultation. He needs to feel safe and understood, not pressured. You might share with him your concern for his overall health, rather than focusing solely on the issue of intimacy." At the end of that first consultation, I saw a different gleam in Esther's eyes, a mixture of hope and understanding that made me believe this would be the beginning of a transformative journey. She left the office with some practical guidelines, but above all, with the certainty that she was not alone in facing this challenge. 2 weeks later, to my satisfaction, Charles appeared at my office. His demeanor tried to convey casualness, as if he were there merely for a routine checkup. But his restless eyes told another story. As a physician specializing in men's health, I had learned to read those small nuances that say so much about our patients. "Mr. Charles," I began, using his title as a sign of respect, something I'd learned is especially important for older patients. "How can I help you today?" He settled into the chair, running a hand through his graying hair in a gesture that betrayed his nervousness. "Well, doctor, Esther insisted that I come in for some routine exams. You know how wives are, always so concerned." That was a delicate moment. I needed to build a bridge of trust with Charles so that he felt safe enough to share his true concerns. "It's natural for her to worry," I replied with a warm smile. "Taking care of one's health is a form of love, isn't it?" I noticed something change in his expression, a small crack in the armor he had built. "Yes," he replied after a pause. "Esther has always taken very good care of me. Perhaps even more than I deserve lately." It was the moment I had been waiting for, an opening for a deeper conversation. "Why do you say that, Charles?" He fell silent for a few moments, as if weighing every word. "Doctor, things have changed. I have changed. And I don't know how to handle it." With care and sensitivity, we began to explore these changes. Charles spoke about how his body no longer responded in the same way, about how he felt less vigorous, less manly. His words carried years of social expectations and self-imposed pressures. "You know, doctor," he continued, his voice now lower, "I spent my whole life being the provider, the strong one, the one who solved everything. Now—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Now I feel as though I am losing it. All." It was crucial at that moment to demystify some concepts. "Charles, what you're feeling is a natural response to the changes that come with aging. It in no way diminishes your masculinity or your worth as a man and husband." I explained in clear and accessible language the natural hormonal changes of aging, how they affect the body and consequently sexual response. I also emphasized that there are various ways to maintain a satisfying and healthy intimate life. "The important thing is to understand that these changes do not signify the end of intimacy," I explained. "In fact, they can be an opportunity to discover new ways to connect with your wife." I saw his shoulders tense slightly. "But how can I do that? How can I look at Esther knowing that I am no longer the same man?" "Charles," I responded with gentle firmness, "you are still the same man. You're just in a different phase of life. And Esther is here, wanting to go through this phase with you. She came to see me not because she is dissatisfied, but because she cares about you, about your well-being." I noticed that my words touched him deeply. His eyes welled slightly, though he tried to hide it. "Did she say that?" "Yes, and more. She spoke of your 35 years together, of how you have always been present and affectionate. What she seeks is not a return to an idealized past, but the opportunity to build a present where you can truly be together again." I then proposed a follow-up plan that included not only the medical aspect, tests and possible treatments, but also guidance on communication and intimacy. "The first step," I explained, "is to establish an open dialogue with Esther. You need to relearn how to talk about your feelings, fears, and desires." Charles nodded, and for the first time, since entering the office, I saw a glimpse of hope in his eyes. "It won't be easy," he admitted. "I'm not used to talking about these things." "No one said it would be easy," I replied with an encouraging smile. "But it is worth trying. And you're not alone on this journey. I'm here to support you every step of the way." The following weeks were crucial in our follow-up with Esther and Charles. I had seen many times that the first steps after recognizing a problem are often the most challenging. The couple was willing to work on their relationship, but they needed guidance to transform that willingness into concrete actions. We established a protocol for regular follow-up. Charles began a series of tests to evaluate his overall health, including hormonal levels and other important markers. But beyond the purely medical aspect, we implemented a holistic approach that considered the couple's emotional and relational well-being. The hardest part, confessed Esther during one follow-up appointment, is finding the balance between showing concern and not seeming controlling. Her eyes revealed the delicacy of this dilemma that many couples face in similar situations. For his part, Charles was beginning to open up more during our conversations. "You know, doctor," he shared in one of our sessions, "I always thought I had to solve everything on my own. That's how my father did it. That's how I saw other men my age doing it. But I'm learning that this isn't necessarily true." It was gratifying to see how small changes were beginning to make a difference. I suggested that the couple set aside dedicated times to talk, without external distractions. Not necessarily about their difficulties, but about their days, their thoughts, their dreams, the reconnections that had been lost in the silence of recent months. At first it was strange, Esther recounted with a shy smile. We would sit on the couch after dinner, not quite knowing what to say, but gradually, the words began to flow naturally. Charles added during his next appointment, "I found out that Esther had started a painting class, something she had always wanted to do, but I hadn't even noticed. I realized how much I was missing out on by being so closed off." As part of the therapeutic process, I introduced mindfulness exercises adapted for couples, simple breathing and presence techniques they could practice together to create moments of connection without pressure or expectations. The idea was to reclaim intimacy in its broadest sense, starting with the basic act of being truly present for one another. "It's interesting," Charles observed in one of our sessions, "how these exercises helped me become aware of tensions I didn't even know I was carrying. I always thought relaxation was a waste of time, something for less busy people. But I'm starting to see how it affects everything else." Esther also noticed subtle but significant changes. "Charles started sending me messages during the day," she shared, her eyes sparkling. "Little things, like asking if I wanted something special for dinner or sharing something funny that happened at work. It might seem silly, but it makes all the difference. As a professional, I know that every little progress is an important victory." I explained to the couple how these small behavioral changes are fundamental in rebuilding intimacy. Sexual connection is only one part of a relationship, I emphasized. It is built on a foundation of trust, communication, and mutual affection. During this period, we also worked on deconstructing myths and unrealistic expectations about sexual performance and aging. It was important for both of you to understand that intimacy can take on different forms at different stages of life, and that this does not diminish its value or meaning. "I had never thought of it that way," admitted Charles. "I always associated intimacy with a specific script, as if there were only one correct way to demonstrate love and desire. It's liberating to realize that there are other paths." I watched with satisfaction as the couple began to develop a new language between them. A language that went beyond words and encompassed gestures, glances, and affectionate touches. It was the beginning of a deeper and more authentic reconnection. As the treatment progressed, I noticed a significant change in the dynamic between Esther and Charles. What had once been tension and distance was giving way to renewed closeness. As a specialist in men's and sexual health, it is always gratifying to witness this evolution, especially when a couple is truly committed to the process. During one particularly memorable consultation, Esther shared a moment that symbolized this transformation. "Last night we were just sitting on the porch, having tea. Charles began to talk about his fears, about how he felt vulnerable with all these changes. It was the first time I saw him open up in that way, without me even having to ask. Vulnerability, especially for men of Charles's generation, often represents a significant challenge. Our society still holds rigid expectations about masculinity that can hinder emotional expression. That moment of openness, therefore, meant much more than just a simple conversation. "You know, doctor," Charles commented during his individual consultation, "I always thought that being strong meant not showing fragility, but I'm learning that there is a different kind of strength in being honest about our feelings." As part of the therapeutic process, we introduced exercises for gradual physical reconnection. This was not only about sexual intimacy, but about rediscovering the pleasure of touch, affection, and closeness without pressure or preconceived expectations. At first, I felt a bit silly, Charles admitted with a shy smile. Doing touch and breathing exercises, it seemed so far removed from what I considered intimacy. But it's turning out to be an incredible discovery. It's as if we are dating again, but with a different kind of maturity. Esther added at another moment. I realized that I had forgotten how good it was simply to be near each other, to feel each other's warmth. We had fallen into such an automatic routine that we lost that deeper connection. As a professional in this field, I know that rediscovering non-sexual intimacy is fundamental to the overall health of a relationship. I explained to the couple how affectionate touch and physical closeness release important hormones for emotional and physical well-being, thereby strengthening the bond between them. "It's interesting," observed Esther, "how we worry so much about the physical side of intimacy that we sometimes forget everything else." I am rediscovering Charles in a different way, noticing details I had previously overlooked. Their progress was also reflected in the practical aspects of daily life. Charles started exercising regularly again, a habit he had abandoned in recent years. "It's not just for physical health," he explained. "It's a way to take care of myself, to feel good about who I am. And when I feel good, I can be a better partner for Esther." During our sessions, we continued working on deconstructing myths about aging and sexuality. It was important for them to understand that while maturity does bring changes, it also offers opportunities for a deeper and more meaningful intimacy. Before, I saw changes only as losses, reflected Charles. Now I realize that they also bring gains. I'm more present, more attentive to details, more connected with my own feelings, and with Esther's. The couple's transformation extended well beyond the confines of my office. They began to create new rituals of intimacy, taking walks, together in the late afternoon, sharing relaxing massages before bed, and setting aside moments solely to talk about their days. These small gestures, when added together, built a new way of being together. The most surprising thing, Esther shared, is how these changes have affected other areas of our lives. We're more patient with each other, more understanding. It's as if we've discovered a new language for communicating. After several months of follow-up, the changes in Esther and Charles were evident not only in their words, but in their entire demeanor and interaction. As a specialist in men's and sexual health, I have witnessed many transformations, but each successful case brings with it a unique and special lesson. During a follow-up consultation, Esther shared an observation that perfectly illustrated this evolution. "Doctor, yesterday I was organizing some old photos and found one from our first year of marriage. Do you know what my first reaction was?" I smiled. Not out of nostalgia, but because I realized that today we know each other so much better than we did back then. Esther's insight touched on a fundamental point I always strive to work on, with my patients. The idea that love, like people, evolves and transforms over time. It isn't about being better or worse than before. It's about finding new ways of connection and intimacy. Charles, who had initially even resisted talking about his insecurities, now showed a surprising openness. "It's funny," he commented in one of our sessions, "how we create so many barriers out of fear. Fear of seeming weak, fear of not being enough, fear of rejection. And when we finally manage to talk about it, we realize we are not alone." The therapeutic process had evolved to include not only the treatment of physical issues, but also deep work in emotional reconnection. The couple developed their own strategies to keep intimacy alive in their daily lives, adapting the suggestions to suit their needs and routine. We created a ritual, explained Esther with a sparkle in her eyes. Every Sunday morning, we prepare breakfast together. Nothing elaborate, but it's our moment. We talk about the week, make plans, and sometimes simply sit in silence, enjoying each other's company. It's simple, but it means so much to us, Charles added during his next appointment. Before, I measured our intimacy solely by the physical aspect. If something didn't go as I expected, I felt like a failure. Now I understand that intimacy is so much more than that. It's about being present, about sharing, about caring for one another in different ways. As a professional in this field, I know that this broader understanding of intimacy is fundamental to healthy, lasting relationships. I explained how this new perspective not only enhanced their relationship, but also contributed to their individual physical and emotional well-being. The most interesting thing, observed Charles, is how this has affected other areas of my life. At work, for example, I feel more confident delegating tasks and admitting when I need help. It's as if accepting my vulnerabilities at home has made me stronger in other aspects. Esther noticed similar changes. I realize I'm more patient, not just with Charles, but with myself too. I've learned that every phase of life brings its own challenges and beauties, and that we don't need to cling to one single model of happiness or success. In our subsequent sessions, we continued, consolidating these discoveries. It was important for the couple to understand that the journey of self-discovery and reconnection is ongoing. There will always be new lessons and adaptations to make. It's as if we've discovered a new way to dance together, reflected Esther. Sometimes we still step on each other's toes, but now we know how to laugh about it and move on instead of getting frustrated. Charles added his own metaphor. You know those ancient trees we see in the parks? They continue growing, even after decades. Sometimes in unexpected directions, sometimes more slowly, but they never stop. I think our love is like that too. In our final formal follow-up session, Esther and Charles sat in the office with a serenity that sharply contrasted with the tension evident in their early meetings. As the physician who accompanied them throughout this journey, I felt privileged to have witnessed their transformation. When I first came here, began Esther, holding Charles's hand, I was so worried, so focused on what we had lost, that I couldn't see what we still had, what we could build together. Charles nodded, his gaze revealing a mixture of emotions. I was trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and frustration. I thought I had to be the same man I was 30 years ago, as if time could never pass, as if change were synonymous with failure. As a specialist in men's and sexual health, I know that such transformations are particularly challenging for men like Charles, who grew up in a society that rarely permits vulnerability or the admission of frailties. That made his evolution all the more significant. What I learned, he continued, is that every phase of life has its own beauty. We don't need to compete with our past or with unrealistic expectations. The important thing is to be present, to be authentic, and to continue growing together. Esther added, we discovered that intimacy has many facets. Sometimes it's a lingering embrace. Other times it's a sincere conversation, or simply being there in silence, truly present for one another. During our final conversation, we revisited the journey they had undertaken, the physical and emotional changes, the challenges faced, and the discoveries made along the way. Most importantly, we celebrated the courage they demonstrated in confronting their insecurities and fears. You know what surprised me the most? Reflected Charles. How small changes can make such a big difference. I learned to value the simple moments, to express my feelings, to ask for help when I need it. These are things that seem basic, but they make all the difference in the quality of our connection. Esther smiled upon hearing his words. And the most beautiful thing is seeing how this has strengthened our relationship. Not only the physical intimacy, which has improved greatly, but also our emotional connection, our closeness, our way of communicating. As a professional, in this field, I know that every case is unique, yet the story of Esther and Charles perfectly exemplifies how love can reinvent itself and grow stronger through challenges. They found a new balance, a new way of being together that honors both their past and their present. "Our story isn't over," said Esther, her eyes sparkling. "In fact, I feel as though we are beginning a new chapter, with more wisdom, more understanding, and more love for each other." Charles added, "We learned that love isn't static. It grows, it transforms, it finds new paths. And that doesn't make it any less special. In fact, it makes it richer, deeper." As their physician, I shared some final guidelines, reminding them that caring for one's health and relationship is an ongoing process. It was clear that they had developed the necessary tools to continue their journey together. "You are an example," I concluded, "of how it is possible to face life's changes with courage and love. Every couple has their own story and challenges, but the willingness to grow together, to adapt and reinvent yourselves, is what truly makes the difference." Esther and Charles left the office hand in hand, not as the anxious, distant couple who had arrived months earlier, but as partners who had rediscovered the deeper meaning of love and intimacy. Their story reminded me, once again, that true love does not wear out over time. It renews itself, grows stronger, and finds new ways to blossom.